What bothered me immediately was the pressure gauge moving after I had shut the line down myself. It was June of 2017, on a small oil lease west of Pecos, Texas, about 40 minutes past the last gas station. I worked nights checking lease equipment. That night was hot, even after midnight. The smell of crude sat over the pad, and dust stuck to my arms. The line fed from a separator into 2 storage tanks on the north side. The pressure should have dropped once I closed the upstream valve and isolated it. Instead, the needle climbed from 19 pounds per square inch to 24. I tapped the glass with my flashlight. The needle moved another pound. Gauges stick. They get dirty, jump when the temperature changes, or simply go bad. I checked the valve again. Closed. Then I walked the line, looking for vibration or a leaking fitting. The pipe was warm under my glove, but nothing looked wrong. When I returned, the gauge read 28. The lease had an old radio phone in a metal box by the electrical panel, but it had been unreliable for weeks. My cell usually found 1 bar near the east fence. I tried calling Nate, the day supervisor. The call failed before it rang. I cracked the gauge bleed for half a second. Pressure spat out with a sharp pop, and the needle dropped. As soon as I closed it, it started rising again. The pressure was real. There were only 2 ways for product to enter that section. One was the valve I had shut. The other was a locked crossover behind the tanks. The pad lights did not reach far back there. 1 floodlight had burned out. I stood at the edge of the gravel, shining my beam between the tanks and the fence. Something moved. A man stood up from beside the crossover connection. I raised the light. He turned his face away and walked behind the second tank, fast but not running. "Hey," I called. "Who is that?" No answer. I took a few steps after him, then stopped. We had copper thieves before, but they went for wire or tools. This guy had been touching a pressurized line in the dark, and the gauge was still climbing. I backed toward the pickup. Metal scraped behind the tanks. Then the separator relief chirped. The gauge was near 40. I ran to the manifold and opened the normal vent path. Nothing happened. Someone had closed the block valve on it. I had checked that valve at the start of the shift. It had been open. The man crossed between the tanks. My flashlight caught a dark blue shirt with a reflective stripe across the back. It looked like an old company work shirt. That was when I thought of Ray. Ray had worked drilling and roustabout jobs around the area for years. He had been on our crew for a few months before he got fired. Nate had walked him off one site after an argument, and Ray had returned once to collect a toolbox. He drove a black Dodge with a dented tailgate. The man disappeared beyond the north fence. I moved until I could see the dirt access road outside the pad. About 50 yards down, it sat a dark pickup with its lights off. The tailgate looked bent on one side. My phone showed 2 bars. I called Nate again. He answered on the 4th ring. "I've got someone on the lease," I said. "I think it's Ray. He's opening the crossover and blocking the vent." Nate was quiet for a second. "Get in your truck and leave. The line's at 40. Leave it. Call the sheriff from the county road." I turned toward my pickup. Ray was standing next to it. He had come around the far side while I was on the phone. He was between me and the driver's door, maybe 30 yards away. He wore work clothes and the old blue shirt. In his right hand was a red-handled pipe wrench. Nate was saying something through the phone. I lowered it. "Ray, back away from the truck." He did not move. "You need to leave," he said. His voice carried clearly because there was no wind. "I am leaving. Move away from the door." He looked toward the manifold. "You should have left already." Then he struck something near the truck with the wrench. I heard plastic crack. The left front tire began to hiss. He hit the rear tire next. I stepped behind the separator. Nate was still on the call. I told him Ray was disabling the pickup. Nate said he was calling the sheriff and sending the nearest crew, but they were at least half an hour away. Ray walked back toward the tanks. The pressure gauge was at 47. The line could handle more than that. The old fittings near the separator worried me. If one failed, it could release gas and crude beside hot equipment. Ray understood that. He had created a closed section and was feeding pressure into it through the crossover. He had blocked the vent. He had parked off-site and approached on foot. None of it was random. I stayed behind the separator and watched him open a small drain near the base of the first tank. A thin dark stream ran onto the gravel. "Ray, stop." He looked at me and pulled a lighter from his pocket. I moved before I saw the flame. There was a flash low to the ground, followed by a soft rushing sound. Fire ran along the spill and gathered beside the tank. It was a small fire sitting between me and the pickup. The heat reached me seconds later, like an oven door opening. Ray stepped behind the tank stairs. The wrench was still in his hand. I had two usable ways out. The main gate was past the pickup. The east side dropped into a dry drainage channel that ran under the access road through a concrete culvert. Runoff could hit fast during storms. There had not been rain in weeks. To reach the channel, I had to cross open gravel with no cover. Ray would see me. The relief chirped again. Then I remembered the emergency dump on the opposite side of the separator. It led to an old flare pit south of the pad. We rarely used it, but the line should have been open to the pit. If I opened that dump, the trapped pressure would take the easier path. It should pull flow away from the tank. It could also spread the fire if there was liquid in the line. I did not have much choice. I crouched and moved along the back of the separator. Through the pipes, I saw Ray watching the pickup. The dump valve was 8 feet away. I reached it and put both hands on the wheel. It would not move. I braced one boot against the concrete base and pulled. The wheel broke loose with a loud squeal. Ray heard it. "What are you doing?" he shouted. I kept turning. The pipe kicked under my hand. The gauge dropped 5 pounds at once. Ray came around the stairs. I turned the wheel again. A deep roar moved through the dump line toward the pit. Dust lifted from the berm. A second later, the flame near the tank stretched across the gravel and followed the new flow south. It worked, but not cleanly. Fire crossed the strip between Ray and the north fence. He jumped back, then ran toward the crossover valve. I think he meant to shut it. He had to pass close to the drain he had opened. The fire flared around his boots. He yelled and fell against the tank stairs. The wrench hit the gravel. He slapped at one pant leg, got up, and limped behind the tank. I did not wait. I grabbed my phone and moved south, staying behind the separator until I reached the edge of the pad. The main flame burned in the pit, and black smoke rose straight up. The original spill by the tank was smaller, but it was still burning. I climbed into the drainage channel. The bank was steeper than it looked. My boots slid, and I landed hard on one knee. The channel smelled like dry mud and old oil. Mesquite caught my shirt. Ray shouted behind me. I could not make out the words. I stayed low and followed the channel east. The culvert under the road was only about 3 feet high. I went through on hands and knees, scraping my flashlight against the ceiling. Halfway through, I heard footsteps on the road above me. They stopped. I turned off the light. Dust drifted onto the back of my neck. I could hear my breathing and the fire in the pit. Then something rolled down the bank and struck the concrete near the entrance. It was the pipe wrench. Ray stood outside the culvert. I saw his boots against the orange light. One pant leg was smoking near the ankle. He stepped inside, bent down, and looked into the dark. My phone vibrated. Nate was calling back. The screen lit my face. Ray saw it. He started into the culvert. I crawled backward as fast as I could. Concrete tore one knuckle. Ray reached in with one arm, but the culvert was too low for him to move quickly. His burned leg dragged behind him. I made it out the east side, stood, and ran along the channel. A barbed wire fence crossed it ahead. I dropped flat, pushed my tool bag under the bottom strand, and rolled after it. The barbs caught my sleeve and ripped it from elbow to cuff. Ray did not follow. I kept going until the pad lights were small behind me. Then I climbed out near another pump road and found enough signal to call 911. I gave the dispatcher the lease number and coordinates from my tool bag. The first deputy found me walking beside the road about 20 minutes later. By then, Nate's relief crew had reached the site from the west. They shut the crossover, isolated the damaged section, and put out the remaining fire with foam. The dump had kept the worst of it in the pit. Ray was found after sunrise near his pickup. He had burns on one leg and both hands. He had tried to drive, but the Dodge had sunk off the shoulder where the dirt was soft. He was sitting against the rear wheel. The sheriff's office photographed the cut tires, the open drain, and the valves Ray had moved. They found bolt cutters and road flares in his truck. I returned that afternoon to collect my pickup. Both tires were flat, one mirror was broken, and soot covered the driver's side. The pressure gauge was back at 0. The face of it had cracked from the heat. I was standing directly above the deep end with a mop in my hand when something knocked under the pool deck. It was January of 2017, during a stretch when Cleveland stayed gray for weeks and the snow along the curbs turned the color of exhaust. I worked nights at an old public pool, a few blocks south of Lorraine Avenue. The building was closed for renovations after a pipe burst, but the city still needed someone inside because tools, copper, and new pumps had already been delivered. My shift ran from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. I checked the doors, watched the boiler gauges, and walked the building once every hour. Most nights I listened to AM radio through a little Sony speaker and tried not to fall asleep in the office. Ray was the site supervisor. Denise handled the front desk during the day. Marcus was the plumber, and usually the last contractor to leave. The main pool had been drained for almost a month. Without water, the room felt twice as large. Every sound bounced off the tile. The place smelled of concrete dust and the sharp chlorine odor that never really left. At about 12:40 that first night, I was mopping meltwater near the deep end when I heard 3 dull knocks. Not pipes ticking, not the boiler. Knock, knock, knock. They came from below my shoes. I stopped and waited. Nothing happened. The building had pipes beneath the deck and an old surge tank under the pool, so I figured Marcus had left a valve loose or trapped air was moving through a line. The place made noises all night. Metal popped when the heat came on. Once, a ceiling panel fell in the women's locker room and nearly made me quit. I moved the mop a few feet. The knocking came again, directly under me. I stepped back. It stopped. I walked forward. 3 more. I called Ray. He answered half asleep. "Probably the return line," he said. "Write it in the log." "Would a return line knock when I walk over it?" "Old building." I wrote it down and finished my round. The next night, Marcus said he had checked the pipes. Nothing loose. "What about the surge tank?" "Tank's dry." I asked if an animal could get inside. Marcus showed me a square steel hatch set into the tile behind the starting blocks. A yellow tool cart had been parked over it for weeks. "The bolts are out because we're replacing the float," he said. "But that lid weighs close to 80 pounds. He pushed the cart back and left. At 1:15, the knocking started again. This time, I tested it. I walked along the empty pool, then doubled back. The sound only came when I crossed a section about 6 feet wide near lane 5. 3 knocks, every time. It felt deliberate. I went to the office and watched the security cameras. The feeds were grainy black and white images from cameras installed years earlier. The pool room feed showed the deck and part of the empty bowl. At 1:38, something dark passed behind the drain grate at the bottom of the pool. It was there for less than a second. A shape crossed the opening and blocked a work light shining through from the pump room. I replayed it. The picture broke into squares when I scrubbed backward, but I found the moment again. The shape looked like a hand. I called Ray. He sounded annoyed until I said I had video. Then he sent Marcus back. Marcus arrived around 2:20 in a Browns jacket, carrying a mag light. He watched the clip twice. Could be a rag in the line. A rag with fingers? Picture's garbage. We went into the pool room. The overhead lights warmed up slowly, buzzing above us. Marcus moved the yellow cart. Fine gray dust covered the hatch except near one corner, where it had been wiped clean. He hooked 2 fingers into the ring handle and lifted. The lid rose an inch, then dropped. "Something's holding it." He tried harder. A line of black space opened beneath it. A smell came out that did not belong in a pool. Sweat, damp clothes, old canned food. Marcus let the lid fall shut. "Call the cops." Before I could unlock my phone, something hit the underside of the hatch. The steel lid jumped. Then another impact came from inside the empty pool. A man's face was behind the circular drain grate at the bottom of lane 5. Only part of it fit in the opening. One eye, a cheek, wet hair pressed against the metal. He was looking up at us from below the pool. Marcus grabbed my arm. The face vanished. We ran to the office and locked the door. I called 911 and told the dispatcher there was an intruder under the pool. "How does he get from the tank to the drain?" I asked. "Crawl channels," Marcus said. "Some are big enough." The dispatcher told us officers were on the way and to stay inside. For about 5 minutes, nothing happened. Then the camera covering the men's locker room hall went black. A few seconds later, the mechanical corridor feed went black. "He's cutting cables," Marcus said. The office lights shut off. The Sony speaker clicked and went silent. Red emergency lights came on in the hallway. The camera system stayed alive on battery backup, but half the feeds were gone. On the pool feed, a construction lamp still shone into the empty bowl. Something moved behind the drain grate again. Then the same face appeared at another grate near the shallow end, 50 feet away. He raised one finger to his lips. The office had a second door leading into a staff corridor that connected to the filtration room and an emergency exit. We decided to use it. Marcus opened the door and listened. The corridor smelled of hot dust from the boiler pipes. Somewhere ahead, water dripped at a steady pace. We moved with our phone lights. To reach the exit, we had to pass the filtration room and an open service tunnel. Halfway there, metal scraped behind us. A small floor grate lifted near the wall. Fingers came through first. Dirty nails, pale skin split around the knuckles. Marcus shoved the grate down with his boot. The man hit it so hard Marcus lost his balance. Go! We ran into the filtration room. I slammed the door and locked it. The man struck the other side almost at once. The door flexed inward. The emergency exit was 30 feet away, past the chemical cage. I could already hear sirens. Then the room went dark. My phone light caught blue pump motors, white PVC, and a ladder fixed to the wall. The pounding stopped. Marcus whispered, "He knows another way in." I remembered the pipe diagram beside the control panel. The surge tank had an upper hatch in the pool room, and a lower service passage that entered behind a bank of filters. I aimed my light there. A head rose above the filters. The man was thin, maybe in his 40s, wearing a dirty sweatshirt with the sleeves cut off. His hair hung in clumps. He looked angry that we were in his way. Marcus grabbed a metal valve key. The man ducked out of sight. We backed toward the exit. I reached for the crash bar, but Marcus stopped me. He'll follow us outside. We heard the man moving behind the filters, hands sliding over pipes. I looked at the control panel. One renovation tag said surge tank fill. Marcus had explained that line earlier in the week. They used it to test the new float valve. Can we flood the tank? Marcus turned two valves while I hit the pump switch. The motor kicked on. Pipes shook above us. Water rushed somewhere under the floor. Behind the filters, the man stopped moving. Then he screamed. It was not a word, just a raw yell, followed by splashing below us. Marcus opened the bypass farther. The pipe beside him bucked in its brackets. The man started pounding on the lower service door. "How much water?" I asked. "Enough to make him use the top hatch." We ran back toward the pool room. As we passed the office, I heard the dispatcher still talking through my phone, which I had left on the desk. I grabbed it and said we were moving to the emergency exit. In the pool room, the construction lamp threw a white beam across the empty bowl. Water hissed below the deck. The steel hatch near lane 5 jumped. Once, twice. Then it lifted. The man forced his shoulders through the opening. Water poured off his sweatshirt. He dragged himself onto the tile and lay there coughing. Marcus and I were already at the far end. The man looked up, then stood. He had something metal and narrow in his right hand. We ran through the staff corridor and hit the emergency door. Cold air came in so fast it hurt my teeth. The alarm sounded behind us as we crossed the parking lot. 2 Cleveland police cruisers turned in less than a minute later. Officers searched the pool room, filtration area, and tank. They found blankets, food wrappers, empty water jugs, and a battery lantern inside the reservoir. They did not find the man. At 6, Denise and the renovation crew arrived. Ray showed up soon after, asking how someone could disappear from a locked building. Then Denise noticed the men's locker room door was closed. It had been open when police arrived. An officer pushed it in with his foot. Wet footprints crossed the tile and ended at a row of dented green lockers. The room was empty. One ceiling panel above the showers had been moved aside. Beyond it was a maintenance gap connected to the rear storage hall. The back delivery door was standing open. On the floor beside it was the metal object I had seen in the man's hand. It was the recessed ring handle from the surge tank hatch. What I noticed in Nolan's house was that none of the clocks agreed, and the second was that most of them had stopped. I was doing house calls for a clock shop outside Waterbury in March 2013. A customer gave Nolan my number and said he had an old German floor clock that needed cleaning. He lived west of Litchfield, down a narrow road off Route 202, where the snowbanks had gone gray. He sounded normal on the phone. Older guy, careful voice, knew enough to describe the movement as weight-driven. He asked me to come during the day because the driveway froze after dark. I arrived a little after 11. The house was a wide colonial, far back from the road. No mailbox, just 2 stone posts. My Ford van slipped once going uphill. Nolan waited on the porch in a brown cardigan and work gloves. "You found it," he said. Eventually, he smiled without laughing. He was around 60, thin, with silver hair combed back. Before I could stop him, he took my tool case and carried it inside. The entry hall smelled of lemon oil and old fabric. Clocks covered both walls, mantel clocks, schoolhouse clocks, cuckoo clocks with their doors wired shut. Enough were running to sound like steady rain. Then I looked closer. A black Seth Thomas had stopped at 8:17. The oak regulator beside it showed 2:41. A brass travel clock read 11:06. None matched my phone. "Do you wind all these yourself?" I asked. "Most of them. The stopped ones are waiting." That made sense for a collector. People buy broken clocks and leave them for years because repairs cost more than the clock. Nolan led me through a dining room crowded with more cases. Paper tags hung from several winding keys, but I could not read them. His floor clock stood in a rear sitting room. Tall walnut case, moon dial, 3 brass weights. The center weight hung lower than the others. The pendulum was still. Nolan stayed close while I opened the hood. "Is it rare?" he asked. "Not especially. Nice case." "How long could it run without anyone touching it?" "A week between windings." "I mean without service." I looked at him. "Depends on dust, humidity, worn bushings. 5 years, maybe longer. But it will lose time." "What mechanism lasts the longest?" He asked it like he was choosing a furnace. I said a simple weight-driven movement could last years if kept clean. There was no single answer. Nolan nodded, as if that helped him. I removed the side panel and shined my penlight inside. One cable had crossed itself on the drum. While checking the pulleys, I saw a dark smear behind the pendulum board. At first I thought it was old grease. Clock cases collect odd dirt, and oil turns black. I crouched and aimed the light lower. The smear was reddish-brown. It ran down the backboard and disappeared under a wooden rail. Beside it were short marks, about the width of fingertips. Nolan watched me. "Something spill in here?" I asked. "Possibly. It looks like blood." He leaned slightly, not enough to see. "People cut themselves." I had found old blood on sharp brass edges before, usually a drop. This looked like a wiped hand. I reached for my phone. No signal. That was common in the area, so I said I needed a towel from the van. What I wanted was a minute outside to decide whether I was being stupid. Nolan moved between me and the doorway. "I have cloths downstairs," he said. "The workshop is better equipped. Take the movement to the bench." "I can do it here." "I would prefer the bench." His voice stayed polite. That bothered me more than an argument would have. I said I needed my movement stand from the van. He glanced toward the front hall, then at my open tool case. "I have one." He picked up the case again. I should have left, but a stain was not proof, and collectors are strange. He also had several $100s worth of my tools, so I followed him. The basement door was off the kitchen. Nolan switched on fluorescent tubes before we went down. One tube clicked every few seconds and gave off a cold blue light. The basement was large. Shelves held movements wrapped in newspaper. The workshop had a maple bench, a lathe, an ultrasonic cleaner, and labeled drawers. There were clocks down there too, rows of them, all stopped. I counted 12. No 2 showed the same minute. Cream index cards hung from several pendulum rods, each dated in pencil. One read, October 14th, 2006, 3:22. The face showed 3:22. The next read, June 9th, 2008, 12:47. That face showed 12:47. Nolan set my case on the bench and opened the latches. "What are the dates?" I asked. "Acquisition dates." "Why write the time?" "I keep complete records." Under the bench was a canvas tool roll. Beside it sat a red parts box with a faded repair shop sticker from Bristol. I knew that sticker. The shop had closed after its repairman, Pete, disappeared in 2009. Pete's truck had been found near Farmington. His wife said he had gone to meet a customer, but his appointment book was missing. I picked up the box. "That is not yours," Nolan said. Pete's name was written inside the lid in black marker. He labeled everything. I put it down. I knew him. Nolan removed his gloves one finger at a time. His hands were pale except for a thin cut across one knuckle. Then you know he was competent. Where did you get this? He brought it. The bad fluorescent tube stopped clicking. For a second, the only sound was the faint ticking upstairs. I walked toward the stairs. Nolan pressed a button beside the bench. The basement door slammed above me. I ran up and hit it with my shoulder. It did not move. Metal slid into place on the other side, heavier than a normal lock. Nolan. No answer. I went down 2 steps. Nolan opened a tall cabinet I thought held lumber. Inside was a mechanical saw on a steel arm, the kind used for cutting metal stock. He pulled the arm out. "I need one answer," he said. "Which clock would continue the longest if nobody came back?" I stared at him. He pointed to the shelves. "Choose the mechanism. Open the door. Choose first." The motor started with a low hum. The blade moved slowly at first, slow enough to see the teeth. I backed toward the bench. "What did you do to Pete?" Nolan looked annoyed, as if I had asked about a private account. "He chose poorly." He pushed a lever. The blade sped up. Hot machine oil and old metal filled the room. I grabbed a brass clock plate from the bench and threw it. Nolan ducked. The plate struck the cabinet and bounced away. Then he came at me. He caught my coat and drove me into the bench. Drawers opened and screws spilled over the floor. I hit his head with my elbow. He held on. The saw kept moving behind him. I twisted out of the coat and ran along the shelves. Nolan grabbed my shirt, tore it, and lost his grip. A wooden case tipped between us. The glass broke with a flat pop. I reached the stairs again. The door was solid oak. The hinges were outside. There was a narrow gap at the bottom, but no room for a tool. Nolan came up slowly. Blood ran from his ear into his cardigan. "You repair things," he said. "Use what is here." Beside the stairs stood a tall regulator, with its movement on a test stand. 2 iron weights hung from cables. The long pendulum ended in a heavy brass bob. I pulled the left weight upward, gave the cable slack, and lifted it off the hook. Nolan stopped 3 steps below me. "Put that back." I threw the weight into the exposed movement. The brass plates bent inward. Gears jumped free. One cable snapped across the stand. The second weight dropped, the frame lurched sideways, and the pendulum swung out. Nolan raised his arm too late. The brass bob struck his shoulder and the side of his head. He fell backward into the shelves. Clock cases came down around him. I picked up the iron weight and hit the basement door beside the latch. The first blow split the wood. The second made a crack wide enough to see the kitchen. On the third, the lock tore through the frame. I went through the door and out the front without my coat or tools. Nolan made a low sound downstairs, but he was moving. I heard wood shifting under him. My van keys were still in my pocket. I clipped one stone post backing out and did not stop until a gas station near Route 8, where my phone had signal. State police found Nolan alive in the basement. The pendulum had fractured his shoulder and cut his head. He claimed I attacked him after he refused to pay for an estimate. That story lasted less than an hour. Behind the workshop shelves was a storage room. Police found tool cases, watches, shoes, wallets, and appointment cards from repairmen missing in Connecticut and Western Massachusetts. Pete's truck key was in a labeled envelope, along with keys from 2 other men in the trade. The stopped clocks were taken as evidence. Each tag had a name on the back. The time on the face matched the time Nolan had written beside the name. Investigators believed he stopped each clock after the person died. They never told me how exact the times were or how he had confirmed them. The floor clock upstairs had a tag too. It showed the date, March 19th, 2013. Under it, Nolan had written 1:36. When police photographed the basement after my call, the digital clock above his workbench read 1:29.